Hello and welcome to a Firstpost POV. Amid floods, droughts and typhoons, a major climate gathering is happening in Brazil as we speak, the much-hyped COP30. More than 200 countries and 50,000 delegates are set to gather in Belém, which is a city in Brazil and is also seen as the gateway to the Amazon rainforest. You can see some of those delegates right behind me. But leaders of some of the top polluters are giving this summit a miss, and that includes the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who has famously declared climate change to be the biggest hoax known to mankind. Without high-profile participation, the question is, what can the summit achieve, and what can we call even the resemblance of a victory in Belém? Let me put some of these questions to my guest, Mr. Erik Solheim, who's a former Minister for Climate and Environment in Norway, and he was also the former Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to us on Firstpost.
Very happy to be on the show. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, a lot of literature around this summit seems to suggest that the focus isn't essentially on new goals or a new target or a new mission. It's on implementing the targets that were already set in the previous summits. What exactly are those targets that these experts are talking about? And is there any likelihood that we will see a push towards implementation in Brazil?
Look, this Conference of the Parties for Climate is happening 10 years after the Paris Declaration, and there will be a lot of focus on the implementation of those goals. But there are two major shifts in global affairs which has happened in the meantime, which people tend not to focus on. One is the shift from a Europe-led process to a global South-led process. China is now by far, without any comparison, the lead nation on everything green, and India is the second. So while Europe and America may have led in 2015, now China and India is leading. And the second shift is from a focus on the talks to a business focus. It's basically business, the implementation of solar and wind and hydropower and electric cars and electric batteries by business, which is changing the world, not so much the talks.
Right. Now, when you say these rounds of talks are going to be led by the global South countries like India and China, are we talking about the global South pitching ideas? Are we talking about them harnessing the political will of the global South? Are we talking about funding? In what ways are you expecting countries like India and China to lead these climate talks at this point?
They are mainly leading the actual implementation of the change, which means installation of solar and wind and hydropower and all the rest. Look, China is now making more money from exporting renewables than the United States of America is making from exporting fossil fuels. So it's a complete change. All over the world, solar energy is now the cheapest. If you switch from coal to solar, it's not a cost, it's a cost saving. You make money from the switch. And that's what's changing the world, the actual fact that renewables are cheapest. And if you switch from a gasoline car to an electric car, you will also save money over time. So it's the kind of the economy which is driving the change, not the climate talks in places like Belém.
Right. You mentioned China and how they are driving it. Like you mentioned, they have a big built-up capacity when it comes to electric cars and solar energy. India is also another big player in this sector. How do you see them impacting the talks in Belém? What does New Delhi bring to the table? And I ask because I know that you've tracked New Delhi's green transformation and India's role in these talks for a long time. What does India bring to the table?
India is bringing some wonderful domestic developments. I mean, let me just mention one. I was just in the state of Andhra Pradesh. In Andhra Pradesh, the Greenco Group has set up the largest integrated renewable facility in the world. It's 5 gigawatts of solar, 1 gigawatt of wind, and pumped storage as a battery, 1.5 gigawatt. People may not really understand all these figures, but this is large, large, large. And it showcases to Africa, to the rest of the developing world, what can happen. Look, there is nothing like this in Europe. There's nothing like this in the United States of America. Only in China and India you find this at the moment, but very soon you will see it in Indonesia and Vietnam, and also in large African nations like, say, South Africa or Nigeria.
Right. Now, one issue that always seems to dominate these COP summits is the draft agreement at the end of it, where countries try to build some sort of a consensus on the final document. In COP28, there was a reference to transitioning away from fossil fuels, which was watered down, effectively removed in the COP29 summit last year. This time, are you expecting the whole fossil fuel conversation to be mentioned in the document again, or do you just expect the countries to gloss over it again?
Let's look to the real world. I mean, fossil fuels will not be abandoned by any declaration from any global conference. Fossil fuels will be abandoned by Tongwei, which is the largest Chinese solar company, or Goldwinds, which is the largest Chinese wind company, or by Greenko, as I just mentioned, or the Adani Group in India, the big business which are now making renewables affordable for everyone. That's what's changed in the world, not so much the conference text. I think it's good for this conference that Trump stays away. The Americans really destroyed the plastic conference recently. They destroyed the International Maritime Organization, who wanted to make rules for shipping. They were both destroyed actively by the United States. Now the United States stay away. And the host of Brazil, which has a very determined focus on the Amazon, and China and India and Europe, they can all come together and achieve some positive developments. We don't need the United States of America for these achievements.
I must dwell on that point a bit. You say it's good that Donald Trump is not coming to the summit, they would just wreck the whole thing. But the fact is, the United States historically and even now is one of the biggest polluters and emitters in the world. So without them at the table, without the US government making active financial contributions or commitments to cut down on emissions, how realistic is it to hope that we can get this climate emergency under control? At the end of the day, you need the Americans at the table, don't we?
Look, I mean, there are new elections in the United States of America already in 2028. We may see America coming back to the table. And of course, in Belém, you will see a number of states from the United States which are there, businesses, civil society group. So it's not like the United States has abandoned. But I think overall it's good that Trump is not there, because we don't need anyone who deliberately try to destroy the talks. Brazil will have a massive focus in Belém on rainforest. That's why it's happening in Belém, in the midst of the rainforest. And also here there are good news. I mean, after President Lula came back to power in Brazil, deforestation in Brazilian Amazon, which is the largest in the world, has been drastically reduced. At the same time, Indonesia, the second largest rainforest nation, has brought deforestation largely down to zero, thanks to good regulations by the government, and thanks to big business understanding that we don't need to destroy the forest to create the jobs. And an amazing recent development is a small Latin American nation of Guyana, which has the largest intact rainforest in the world. They have now made an agreement with the World Airlines, where these airlines will fund the conservation of the rainforest in Guyana, meaning livelihood for people living in the rainforest. So that means, well, United Airlines or Lufthansa or Air India or China financing the conservation of the rainforest in Guyana, and we need to see a lot more of that.
Right. Let's also talk about financing, which is inevitably a flashpoint at these COP summits. The initial promise from the developed countries was that they would give $100 billion a year. That was bumped up to $300 billion. But I wonder, are we seeing this money actually being paid from the Western world to the global South countries? Because once the media disappears, once the summit ends, are these commitments being followed through?
To some extent, but of course, absolutely not what we should demand. There is no doubt the climate crisis is caused by the United States of America, by Europe and Japan largely. American emissions up to this point are 25 times Indian emissions per capita. How can anyone demand that India should finance? But of course, India and China is not into this for America or for Europe or for someone else. India and China is into it for itself, for its own people, and to create jobs and prosperity. I listen very carefully to Prime Minister Modi very often, and his messages is hardly ever speaking about global climate talks. I can't recall him speaking about global climate talks. Not so much about emissions either. His message is, how can India bring everyone out of poverty, create a huge middle class of comfort and good livelihoods in India, by doing it by going green, by solar and wind and hydropower and electric cars and electric three-wheelers and all of this. And that is the future. Doing this combined ecology and economy, not seeing them as separate, but as one process, green growth for India, green growth for China, and of course for all of the rest of the global South.
Let's zoom out a bit now and talk about the whole concept of these COP summits. They're a bit controversial for the wider public watching? Because like I just mentioned in my introduction, 50,000 delegates gathering in a city that is ecologically sensitive. It's called the gateway to the Amazon. And we see this every year. Tens of thousands of delegates gather with their private jets, with their own big coterie of people to discuss how to reduce the world's carbon footprint. A lot of people may say this is counterproductive. You're effectively gathering so many people, so many flights and so many hotel stays in one area to tackle the climate problem. How do you convince the public that these COPs are necessary at a time when the trust in government to solve this problem is so low?
It's obviously a fair criticism which need to be considered. However, overall, I still believe these conferences serve a purpose, not the talks. I mean, the diplomatic talks in Berlin will hardly bring anything. But this is a gathering of business, civil society activists, and government officials. They will come together, they will share ideas, they will make business deals for the green transition, they will set a direction for the future, they will learn about what's happening in the most advanced places. I mean, say, learn about what's happening in the battery or electric vehicle industry in China. And they will also set up funds and instruments which will have some impact. So overall, I believe it's useful, but not because of the diplomatic talks. Those will bring very little.
Is that then the future of these COP summits? A couple of years down the line, we barely see any leaders turning up for COP. We see all these business leaders, though, and the private sector and charities and NGOs turn up, learn how other countries operate, take those lessons back to their own countries. Are we looking at the government taking a back step in these COPs going forward?
These are useful even if not all the presidents and prime ministers of the world are there. I mean, I believe every government in the world, maybe except for the United States, is in Berlin. Even if President Xi is not there, well, China will be well represented, and you can go on and go on and go on. So I believe this is useful. I mean, look, next year it will probably take place in Australia, 2028, maybe in India. So it's a huge festival where everyone is coming together and there will be a lot of developments, but the inner core of talks between governments will bring very little. At the end of the day, it's the national decisions made by Modi and Xi and the leaders of the European Union, or Lula of Brazil, or Ramaphosa of South Africa, alone. That's what matters. And those decisions are made domestically, even if they are referred to at the global talks.
Right. Now, finally, just one more question about another criticism COPs face, which is that some of the hosts have been a bit problematic. You look at UAE, a major producer of oil. You look at the year before in Baku, Azerbaijan, another major producer of oil. There have been controversies where the people who are heading these talks themselves are heavily involved in the oil and energy and gas sector and therefore contributing to the pollution. Do you think that the selection of the host of the COP summits also has to be a bit more rigorous in order to not give out the wrong symbols?
I tend to believe that some of these criticisms are unfair. I mean, look, United Arab Emirates, for example, has been very successful in turning some of its oil money also into investment in green industries. And these talks must reflect the world. I mean, Brazil is a major rainforest nation. Well, last year or the year before, Azerbaijan and UAE were there. They are main oil producers. Next year to be Australia, hopefully, and they have a huge number of. They will also focus on the situation in the Pacific with all the small island development states. So turning this around the world to different nations is simply reflecting the state of the world in the 2020s, and oil producing nations are also part of that, and we need to encourage them to turn their oil revenue into investments in solar and wind, and we see that this now happening also big time in the Middle East. I mean, Saudi Arabia, for example, very recently made an agreement with BYD, the Chinese battery and car maker, which is the largest investment in electric batteries anywhere in the world.
Right. Now, I think the two big takeaways from this conversation that I had at least is that we shouldn't get too hung up on who's participating and who's not in these summits. For instance, the non-show of Mr. Donald Trump isn't something that we should focus on because private sector and activists and NGOs are taking a leading role nowadays. And secondly, it's going to be India and China that will set the climate agenda for the world and lead this revolution towards green energy and tackling the climate emergency. We'll be tracking how things unfold in Brazil at COP30. But thank you so much, Mr. Solheim, for speaking to us on Firstpost.
Thank you.
Want the facts?
The latest developments?
News that gets straight to the point.
Well, we've got all three just for you. This is Firstpost Live, a brand new show, your window into what really matters.
Don't miss it.